So you would hope that they would do that. But I guess the question that I'm thinking about for myself in this is what would be a good way to test the robustness of peer review and the editorial process with different journals? So what am I looking at here? This is from the Higher Education Quarterly. Donor Money and the Academy, Perceptions of Undue Donor Pressure in Political Science, Economics, and Philosophy, Say Jones and Cal Avers Linde III. And here's the reason why I want to read this abstract real quick. And then we'll talk a little bit more about it, because I'm not going to end up reading the paper. And I have a good reason for that. This paper uses a standardized randomized survey instrument to investigate whether faculty and professional staff at four-year universities and colleges perceive themselves to be subject to various kinds of illicit pressures, and then investigates how such perceived pressures correlate with donations from both right-wing and left-wing sources. Receiving funding from right-wing sources has not only a significant typo in the abstract, that should have been capitalized, has not only a statistically significant positive effect on perceived pressure to promote right-wing causes and candidates, but the effect size is large to very large. Right-wing money strongly appears to induce faculty and administrators, including those who self-identify as members of the right, to believe that they are pressured to hire and promote people they regard as inferior candidates, to promote ideas they regard as poor, and to suppress people and ideas they regard as superior. So, if this seems a little strange to you, as it does to me, there's a very good reason for that, and that's because this is not a legit paper. And the reason, and you may be surprised at this because this is a legit journal, it's an early view, online version before the inclusion in issues, so they have not actually included this in a specific journal volume or journal issue as yet. It is online available early view. But this is not a legit article. This is a hoax article. And here's how I know that it's a hoax article. Academic journal publishes hoax paper alleging right-wing donor influence in universities. So, the academic journal, this is from the National Review. The academic journal, Higher Education Quarterly, published an article in October that appears to be a fake study arguing that conservative donor groups routinely influence academics to promote right-wing professors and concepts. Now, I will say it is alleged. This has not been proven just yet. This is kind of hot off the presses. As this came across my plate, this is actually from earlier today, this particular article. But the article was published online on October 25th in the journal's early views section, described as, quote, the online version of record before inclusion in an issue, and was still available for download from Wiley Publishing Company as of Wednesday. And if it had been retracted from early view, I might have been able to see it, but there would have been a large note here to say that it had been retracted, which it has not, actually. And so that's why it is fascinating to still see it. So again, I'm pretty sure, I'm not so sure what this is and whether or not this is a hoax paper. I haven't been able to see the actual paper itself, because I'll show you in a second. It's actually behind a paywall for me, where I am right now. So, I mean, I'll have to go get it. Yeah, like I said, I can't get a hold of it to actually take a look at it right now to know for sure, and I'm not interested in paying a decent amount of money to actually get it right now. But I may try and look it up through other means if I can get to it. So, still available for download. So I will be curious to see how the journal responds, because this is kind of hot off the presses that it's been ascertained or believed to be a hoax paper. But either way, whether it is or is not, gives me a lot of things, gives some interesting conversation that we can have. Let's see. quote, right-wing money strongly appears to induce faculty and administrators to believe that they are pressured to hire and promote people they regard as inferior candidates, to promote ideas they regard as poor, and to suppress people and ideas they regard as superior, the paper states, apparently inverting the complaint that many conservatives have lodged against universities. However, the initials of the two purported authors, Sage Owens and Carl Alvars Linde III, spell out Sokal in a nod to a New York University physics professor, Alan Sokal, who published a nonsense study in the Journal of Social Text in 1996. After it was revealed that the study was fake, Sokal explained that he had submitted it for publication to expose what he called, quote, the nonsense and sloppy thinking. The episode came to be known as the Sokal hoax. So here is the thing about this. Social Text may be familiar to some of you because Social Text was one of the journals that was hoaxed a few years ago by James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian, and Helen Pluckrose as part of what is now known as the Grievance Studies Affair. So this journal has been hoaxed before. Sokal's particular thing here in the Grievance, not in the Grievance Studies Affair, but in 1996, he actually submitted a hoax paper to Social Text arguing that gravity was a social construct. Which is why it popped up there. Quote, the initials were intentional. The person writing under Owen's name told National Review via email. That person did not reveal their identity. While Alvars Linde is described as a professor of economics at the University of California, Los Angeles, neither Alvars Linde nor Owens is listed among the department faculty on the UCLA website. The paper, titled Donor Money in the Academy, Perceptions of Undue Pressure in Political Science, Economics, and Philosophy, includes the Olin Foundation and the Randy Eller Foundation among the right-wing donor sources subject to research. However, the Olin Foundation disbanded in 2005, and the Randy Eller Foundation does not appear to exist, a detail noted by Stephen Hayward at Powerline. The paper also lists the Federalist Society among donors to four-year universities and colleges. However, a Federalist Society spokesperson told National Review in an email that the organization, quote, does not donate to undergraduate programs. National Review has reached out to Higher Education Quarterly and its editors for comment. The nature of the review process for the article was not immediately clear. We plan to reveal the full extent of this hoax later, purported author Owens told the Chronicle of Higher Education on Tuesday. For now, we recommend readers look for other fake papers. Oh! That's interesting. I hadn't read this through all the way before recording. And so there's more fake papers apparently according to this according to the anonymous author or the quasi-anonymous author. Oh goodness. Let me get to the end of this because this is a relatively short article. Let's see. The person writing under Owen's name told National Review, quote, we want to see in this case if it would be possible to publish a paper in an elite journal when the paper is full of blatant and clear statistical errors. The news comes several years after three self-described left-leaning liberal academics attempted to publish Sokal-style hoax papers. That's not quite right, because they did publish them. I think if I remember correctly, they got 7 of those papers published in various journals under the Grievance Studies Affair, including Social Text, before that hoax was revealed, thanks to a very savvy somebody in the a reporter for the Wall Street Journal was actually paying attention that something wasn't quite right. Authors James Lindsay, a mathematician, Peter Boghossian, then of Portland State University, and Helen Pluckrose, a London-based cultural critic, authored 20 hoax papers, 7 of which were published in academic journals. I was right. I should have just read a little bit further. So this does come right after the Grievance Studies Affair. I will be curious. I'm going to go find this article in the Chronicle of Higher Education here real quick, and we'll see if it gives us something interesting. But I wanted to bring this up because we all know full well that peer review, at least in my field, and if you paid attention on this channel enough, you know, peer review is supposed to be an important part of the ideas of organized skepticism, that thusly only those things that are rigorously done, not fundamentally flawed, checked and scrutinized and gone crazy over and over and over again, all of those things, when they pass through that level of scrutiny, should then be published. And it is the peer reviewer's responsibility, not the editor has to pick the peer reviewers, but it is the peer reviewer's responsibility to provide that level of scrutiny whenever they get an article to review. Problem with this is, on one hand, nobody who does peer review gets paid extra for it. We have to do it as part of our regular duties on top of everything we already do. And so that's kind of a problem, because if you're really, really super busy and you get something to review, you're going to be like, do a sloppy review of it. And not be really, really intent and focused on it. You're just going to be very, very sloppy, which is difficult. It's difficult and unfortunate, because that means you really want to give it a good review, but you just can't because you're so busy. That's one thing. And then the other thing is just like, I don't care. Let's just get it published. It looks great. It confirms something I already think is true, and go on. So those kinds of things happen too. So it's it's interesting that way, and because of that, I used to think it was shameful to see these kinds of hoax papers. How dare you? How could you possibly do this? I used to think it was a bad thing. That it really reflected poorly on the people who pulled off these hoaxes, really reflected badly on the people who pulled off these hoaxes. How could you do that? How could you make a mockery of some of these things? Back when I was younger and more naive, I thought that. I don't think that anymore, for obvious reasons now, because seeing sometimes how the sausage is made is pretty revealing to some of its flaws. And yes, you need some kind of system for review to critique and scrutinize and what have you, to make sure only the best, most well done, most rigorously done work, most scholarly work gets published in a peer-reviewed journal and accepted into the communal body of scientific knowledge. That doesn't mean that always happens, and I apologize if my mic seems weird. I'm having some sound issues again today. That doesn't always happen, for obvious reasons. Part of it's just time. Peer reviewers don't always have the time to do as rigorous a review as they should. Sometimes they're lazy, thinking, already confirmed something, I think, and go on. And a whole myriad of other reasons, and then there's that. So I don't think anymore that having people who pull out these hoax things is necessarily bad, because it can show editors the flaws in peer review. It can show journals the flaw in peer review process. And you would hope it would spur people on to spur the editors and the journals on to improve all of that. You hope it would spur peer reviewers on to be more rigorous, to dedicate more time and energy. For me, I can't speak for others, but for me personally, I take every peer review that I get very seriously. I'm very critical of everything. I scrutinize every little detail that I can. Does this make sense? Does that make sense? Are you answering a valid question? What about, did you consider this paper over here and what they say, and how do you counter that? No, well, not counter that. How do you account for what they tell you? And those kinds of situations. I look into all of that, and I critique on all of that. I can't say the same for others. And I wouldn't try to. But in a way, I think all of these hoax papers, when they happen, is a good thing to point out the errors in peer review, and to hopefully improve and get back to something that is more rigorous. Because if you're letting something like that get through, oh crap, right? It says a lot, and it does make readers, serious readers of the journal, then question, how much effort is the editor really putting into this? Are you really, or is the journal publisher a predatory publisher and they'll just publish anything to get themselves more credit, to get themselves promoted and get better and get more citations. Because the way journals are often published is how many citations do they get, you know? Which is not necessarily a good metric for judging journals either. How many citations do they get? How many readers do they have? Things like that are general metrics. And so it's not necessarily about quality. Sometimes it's about quantity, which is always not good. I always have a problem with there's a lot of problems with the quality versus quantity thing. There's in science right now, and so I'm not going to get into that necessarily, but that's where I wonder, and I'm going to say this and it's going to sound strange. I like it when I see hoax papers come up every so often, because it challenges the editors and the journals and the peer reviewers to do a better job when they get through. And I mean, it's embarrassing as hell, or it should be anyway. For some of them, it's not, because I think if John Stossel did a nice review of the Grievance Studies affair that he released recently with James and Peter. So if you haven't gotten the chance to watch it, I recommend you go find it on YouTube. But talking about that, and that was one of the points that they did, was they got something published that was ridiculous. In fact, they got many things published that were ridiculous in an effort to point out the flaws that they saw when they were reading the published articles that were already present. So that was the point of the Grievance Studies affair, that the scholarship in a bunch of these journals, grievance studies, fat studies, disability studies, social text, and the rest, is so terrible that you can just publish anything that doesn't make any logical amount of sense or have any good scholarship behind it. And again, you may disagree on what qualifies good scholarship. That's not the point. It's just that they were publishing things that were nonsensical. And perhaps, quite probably, still are publishing things that are nonsensical. So you would hope that they would do that. But I guess the question that I'm thinking about for myself in this is what would be a good way to test the robustness of peer review and the editorial process with different journals? And I kind of wonder if folks just occasionally trying to publish a hoax paper somewhere, or more frequently trying to publish a hoax paper somewhere, would be the best way to just test the system and make sure it's more rigorous. Because I don't know that we necessarily test the systems of peer review quite regularly to make sure that they are rigorous. So I'm reading this now and I'm thinking, might be a good way to test, try and make sure peer review and the editorial process is working right, that organized skepticism is being followed, that you can end up with, I hope I didn't say disorganized skepticism earlier. I've had for whatever reason, that's been a bug in my head, and maybe that's because I'm a little bit disorganized and scatterbrained right now myself. Anyway, so that would be an interesting way to, not just for things like the social studies, but even for the STEM fields, just make sure things are not being published that are garbage by trying to publish something that is garbage and see if they catch it. Deliberately doing that. I don't know. It's a thought. I'm not necessarily pushing for it, but it is an idea that came to mind. And I do think the hoax papers do have their place here, and I am less hostile toward those who publish, who write up and try to get published hoax papers, because that I think is a very helpful way to test the editorial process and the systems of peer review and make sure that they're robust. I think most of them are. I've reviewed for many good journals that are very robust, and very, very critical with any articles that come to them. And so I think there's a lot of good journals, and I think there's some journals that are predatory and just will take whatever garbage they can get and publish it, which is disappointing, because then you end up with stuff that has the veneer of being peer-reviewed and published in a scientific journal, which is then looked at as the authority because it's a peer-reviewed and published study, right? When it may be just crap. So I think maybe the other thing is, it would be good if some folks in the scientific community maybe got together and identified what they typically consider as predatory publishers at a broader level and put that out there to journalists to note that, hey, we consider these guys to be predatory publishers, not necessarily the best publishers, but mind your biases on that one, right? I don't know. Bunch of thoughts that came to mind. But anyway, hoax papers. Tell me what you think about hoax papers. If you like this video, hit the like button on the way out the door. Subscribe to the channel, share the video, comment on the video, all that good jazz. I look forward to your thoughts on this interesting topic, and I will keep an eye out and see if Higher Education Quarterly has any comment on what this seems to be very much a hoax paper, and judging from the fact that National Review got the author of that paper on the record to say, yeah, that's probably that's ours. That's our hoax paper. I look forward to seeing what the response is from Higher Education Quarterly. I'll be keeping an eye on it. Don't forget, of course, also, come on over to Locals and join us. It is a fun time over there. I'm actually going to test out live streaming tomorrow for Thursday Thoughts, so if you'd like to join us, but that is for supporters only, is Thursday Thoughts. Anyway, that's it for now. Until next time, I'm Adrian. I hope you stay curious.